So Gutenberg again is in 1450, and he's sort of at the beginning of the Renaissance. He was in Germany, so the Northern Renaissance was happening a little bit later. But the Renaissance is basically a term meaning revival or rebirth, and it refers to the transitional movement in Europe between medieval and modern times, beginning in the 14th century in Italy, so that's the 1300s, beginning a little bit later up north in Germany and the Netherlands, and lasting into the 17th century or the 1600s. It was marked by a humanistic revival of classical influence, expressed in a flowering of the arts and literature and the beginnings of modern science. So I'm sure all of you have heard of the Renaissance, are aware of the Renaissance. Maybe you've been to Europe and seen things that were created during the Renaissance. It's really a major, important time where art, science, all of the disciplines are blooming again. We had classical societies, the Romans and the Greeks in Europe, who had made a lot of progress in terms of art, science, math, all these subjects. And then during the Middle Ages, after the fall of the Roman Empire, a lot of this stuff fell apart. We briefly see, like around 800, Charlemagne kind of pops up and brings education back a little bit. But for the most part, in the Middle Ages, not a lot of progress is being made in Europe. And it's finally during the Renaissance that some of these great ideas of the past of Greek and Roman societies start to take hold, and certain advances in technology, certain political changes allow this flowering of all these intellectual ideas to take place. There are several really important innovations in art that happen in the Renaissance. And a lot of them relate to the application of a scientific approach to art and design. So, linear perspective, which you can see here on the left, using vanishing points, finding mathematical systems to describe what we see in the world, the way that things get smaller as they recede into space. If you've taken drawing classes, you've probably worked with linear perspective. This is discovered or sort of quantified during the Renaissance. And also, accurate human anatomy in the arts became very important. Artists were working with scientists, artists were looking at dissected bodies, artists were drawing from skeletons, they were drawing musculature. So, when you look at artwork made in the Middle Ages, it often looks flat. There's often kind of weird anatomy, or things don't really make sense spatially. And in the Renaissance, people begin to make scientific breakthroughs. They begin to apply logic and organization to drawing and painting, and they come up with these important innovations in the arts, things that are still vitally important to the way we think about art today. One of the most important artists, especially in printmaking, but also in drawing, in painting, in design, and graphics. Albrecht Dürer, painter, printmaker, and theorist of the German Renaissance. He spent time in Venice in his early 20s and was a major figure in Italian Renaissance ideas in Germany and Northern Europe. This is the kind of work that Dürer was doing. You may have seen some of these things. He's known for being an incredible draftsman in printmaking, in drawing, in painting, in many different media. One of the important things that Dürer contributed to printmaking was basically his invention of the poster, which is one of the first kinds of public printed material. It's one of the first ways of spreading ideas. He created this woodcut of a rhinoceros, a one-sided oversized print, the first of its kind. And this is very famous. You may have seen this image before. One of many types of images from this era of people who had never seen exotic animals, animals from around the world, but who attempted to recreate them based on the descriptions of people who had traveled or based on stories heard from legends. This image became particularly popular and was copied many, many times in the centuries following. It's still something you see fairly commonly as a poster. I think I've seen a tote bag with this on it. It's a very famous image. So again, Durer basically invents the poster, and for a long time, there's no such word as poster. Things are called broadsides. And a broadside is a large sheet of paper printed on one side only. So a broadside would often be used as posters, it would announce events, proclamations, ideas, it could comment on things, or simply be an advertisement. Eventually, the broadside turns into the broadsheet, which is a two-sided broadside, basically the precursor to the newspaper. So think about an oversized poster format. If you print on both sides, you basically have something that looks like a newspaper page. It became particularly popular in the 17th century and eventually became one of the first sources for political activism by reprinting speeches. So, one of the most important aspects of the poster, and this is certainly something you could look into, political or even advertising posters, is the idea that information and ideas can be spread, that public opinion can be swayed. And this is sort of the beginning of the media, of newspapers, of people reporting and sharing information, and the public having some level of checks and balances or control over what's going on in the world within the seat of power. Here's another very famous work from Durer, a print, and I wanted to show this because it's a really interesting image that is using linear perspective and anatomy and figuration to show us how this worked. So we see on the left a nude figure reclining, on the right an artist drawing on a piece of paper that's been divided into a grid, and he is looking through a sheet of glass which has also been divided into a grid. So if any of you have ever transferred an image this way, where you take a photograph, you draw a grid on it, you take your piece of paper, you draw a grid on it, you know what this process is about. And again, this is a really good visualization of the kind of scientific approach to art and design that's coming of age in the Renaissance, and particularly with Durer. Some wonderful examples of Durer, that's fun to say. No, I've lost my train of thought. Breaking down different parts of the human anatomy and looking at them mathematically, linearly, gridding out the system with measurements, with letters, with numbers, with quadrants, drawing things from multiple angles. So, again, exploring things in the world methodically, scientifically, in a way that follows some sort of scientific method or an ordered way of operating. And again, because the printing press, the alphabet, literacy are happening, those ideas about order and applying some sort of scientific, logical approach to everything in the world, art, design, chemistry, is becoming popular. Durer was also known for using this grid system in a number of ways and was one of the first to apply it to letters or typography. So Durer took typographic letters and made them 8 squares high, which was based on the human proportion of 8 heads high. So he's thinking about what the figure looks like, what's pleasing to the human eye, and how can he apply that to language and to literacy? How can he make writing and text easier to read? Up until this point, typography was basically, in Europe anyway, was basically this German textura type of a font. We'll go to that in a second. So Durer was the first Northern European late Renaissance artist to apply Euclidean mathematical principles to matters of visual representation in a scientific way. His typeface, based on letter forms found at Trajan's Column, completed in Rome in 113 AD. These capital serif letters are carved into the marble base and are the basis for all Roman typefaces to follow, notably Times New Roman, etc. So let's jump ahead. Until the Renaissance, until Durer begins designing these kinds of typefaces, you have these Germanic typefaces that are popular. What you see on the left, this textura, we call it kind of a font. Then in the Renaissance, people begin to look backwards. They begin to think about antiquity. They begin to look at what the Greeks and the Romans and these other great societies do and mimic it. And so, as really the seat of intellectual printmaking power moves from Germany down to Italy, as people like Durer study there, as many artists gather in Italy during the Renaissance, writing styles also change. And these Italian font styles, which we really think of today as being very common, begin to take up more, begin to become more and more popular. One thing you'll notice about the two different fonts is that the Italian styles have a lot more white space. They're easier on the eyes. Sometimes these Germanic styles are called black letter because they are so dense and dark and black. And so again, Durer took the proportions of the human body. He took text from an ancient society and brought those things together to create something that was very beautiful, very easy to read. The idea of legibility hadn't really come to people's minds yet because there wasn't a whole lot of written material out there.